Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for Ask the Expert. I'm Catherine, and I'm the virtual coordinator at the National Aphasia Association. The National Aphasia Association is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to promote public awareness and understanding of aphasia, to promote research that aims to improve the lives of people with aphasia, and to provide support to all persons with aphasia and their caregivers. Our expert this evening is Megan Taylor, an occupational therapist who will be talking with us about sexuality, social participation, and the influence on psychosocial health and quality of life. We've been collecting questions about tonight's topic from our audience through our website, and we'll be answering many of these questions tonight. If you have any additional questions about tonight's topic for our expert during the session, please enter them into the Q&A box, and we'll try our best to answer those as well. And now I would like to introduce tonight's expert, Megan Taylor. Megan Taylor is an assistant professor and academic fieldwork coordinator in the occupational therapy program at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center in Lubbock, Texas. She received a Master of Science in Occupational Therapy from Washington University in St. Louis in 2004, and a doctorate in occupational therapy from Texas Women's University in 2018. She has over 15 years of clinical experience working with adult neurological populations across acute, inpatient rehabilitation, and outpatient settings. In addition to her teaching and fieldwork coordinator roles, she continues to clinically practice at the Montfort Prison Unit. Megan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm going to take a second and make sure I'm sharing my screen.
Looks great.
You guys should be able to see that now. Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much, Catherine, for that introduction and for this invitation to come speak to you guys. I don't consider myself an expert in this area, but what kind of happened is I saw a need. I saw a need among my patients, among my coworkers as health professionals. And now as an educator, I see a need among our students to address this topic of sexuality. And so that's kind of what's happened is over the last 15 years, I've been given the opportunity to speak to my patients and my coworkers and my students about this really important topic of sexuality, but people are really uncomfortable talking about it. And yet the research is showing us how important it is and that it has a really large impact on health, well-being, and quality of life. So I'm excited to be here tonight and hopefully get to answer some of your questions. What I did find challenging about this when I was trying to come up with this presentation and talking to Catherine and knowing there could be a variety of individuals that are attending this presentation, meaning it could be stroke survivors, it could be caregivers, partners, or other health professionals. And so that's kind of challenging in creating a presentation. And so I tried to give pieces of information to all of those groups. And so if you guys have questions along the way, as Catherine mentioned, submit them in the chat and she's going to help monitor that chat. And particularly if she notices a group of questions about a certain topic, I've asked her, please don't hesitate to interrupt me and let's talk about those things that you guys are really wanting to focus on. So use that chat. But here's how I have outlined the presentation. I briefly just want to talk about what is occupational therapy because that's my background and that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And then I want to talk about what is sexuality really? And then it's really important in terms of quality of life. So how do we address it? So that's my goal for this evening. So just starting out, what is occupational therapy? We call ourselves OTs, and we address the things that people need and want to do in their daily life because we consider ourselves occupational beings. So these activities, these tasks that we do every day, we call those occupations. And we believe that people are meant to participate in occupations, and through that participation, that's what lends to our identity and our well-being and our overall health. And so they're really important, and we have a lot of things in common across all people. We have these basic activities that most of us do. So we all sleep at some point. Here's my examples. Most of us go to the bathroom. Maybe there's different ways to do that. We mostly groom in some way, whether that is brushing your teeth or doing your hair, doing your makeup, shaving. We all do many of those tasks, but we may do them differently, or we may do them at different times. What makes us even more unique are these other activities. And so as OTs, we really strive to find what is meaningful and important to you, to whoever our client is. Because me as a health professional, it doesn't matter what I think is important. I want to address what's important to my client. But so this is where people become really unique, because we're coming from all different stages of life, and we're coming from playing different roles in life. Me personally, I'm a wife. I am a mother, I am a daughter and a sister, a friend, hopefully. I'm also an educator. I did have hobbies before children, but I don't have many other hobbies right now, just because that's the phase of life I'm in. But some people are artists, musicians. Some people like to run and exercise. I look at this picture in particular and I see the cooking picture. And to me, that's a necessary evil. It's something that I do because I need to help feed myself, fuel, and feed my children, feed my family. But other people, maybe someone is a chef. And so they hopefully take pride in that, and that's a valuable role for them. Other people, maybe they're not a chef, but they do cooking as a way to experience creativity, or it's an opportunity for them to gather people together and enjoy socializing. And so each of these tasks, again, we all value them differently. We may see some of them as rest, we may see some of them as play, and we may see some of them as work. And so each individual is unique in what roles we have and in what responsibilities we have. And so the OT, we strive really hard to get to know that person individually and what's important to them. So these activities that we do, again, we call them occupations. They give us our identity. And so they give us this sense of responsibilities. And whether we know it or not, we take pride in being able to do those independently. A lot of times you hear people say, we didn't recognize how important that being able to be a mother or an educator or a musician, we didn't know how important that was until I lost some of my independence, whether that's due to aging or disability. And so we recognize that these are important to our identity, they're important to our self-esteem. But when individuals have a stroke, that causes a very abrupt change in individuals' roles and responsibilities. So again, as an occupational therapist, we try to look at each individual person and look at what are their strengths, what are their abilities, what occupations does that person identify as meaningful and important to them? And what is the environment that they need to complete these activities and occupations in? And that refers to the physical environment. So maybe the home, maybe the community, maybe the grocery store. But it also means the environment in terms of their culture, their beliefs, their support system. So we look at the whole person and all of these components to try and help them work together to adjust to this situation that they've been placed in. And ultimately, just to still go back to making sure they can still do those occupations that are meaningful and important to them, because we recognize that these things influence our identity, our health, our well-being, and our overall quality of life. Sorry, I keep hitting the button wrong. There we go. All right. So where does sexuality come into play? Sexuality, social participation, is part of our identity and part of our quality of life. And so people's quality of life are significantly impacted when their sexuality is affected, or they're not as able to engage in relationships with other people. So sexuality and social participation are crucial parts of our lives. And yet what we're finding, particularly when I look at research, is that sexuality tends to be ignored. And it's ignored by the health professionals, but it's also ignored by the clients and the patients we serve. They're not always bringing it up either. So the question is why? And I think this is one of the reasons when you guys hear the word sexuality, this is what happens. People are like, sex. And so some people are like, all right, let's talk about it. But many others, they think sex and they're getting embarrassed, they're getting flushed, they turn away, they don't want to address that. So we get a range of responses when we try and bring up sexuality or intimacy and sex in particular. But one of the first things I wanted to talk about tonight is that sexuality is actually more than just that intimacy component. So what is sexuality? It's interesting that the World Health Organization, they talk about sexuality being a central part of who we are as humans. And so my national organization, the American Occupational Therapy Association, they provide this type of definition for sexuality. And they talk about sexuality as a state of mind. And there is this mental and emotional component to it regarding how we feel about ourselves. So for example, how do I feel about my own body, my own appearance, and the face that I'm presenting to the world? What is my sense of self-worth? What do I value? All of that is part of sexuality. Sexuality is also social. So it's about the fact that as humans, we have this desire to connect with other people. We want to relate to other people, some people more than others, and that's okay. Then there is the physical side too. So it's how do we express our sexuality? And again, this could be in appearances, this could be in the way that we communicate, or it could be in our actions. And there's a variety of that. All of that is on top of that sexual intercourse and intimacy component. So again, I just want to broaden that definition. And so I use these pictures to help describe it a little bit more too. I love the first top two pictures. The one is of someone doing their nails, and then this other is of this just really cheerful woman. And I just see this as looking at and acknowledging what is important to each individual person. That is part of your sexuality. Is it important that you have your nails done and that they look good? Is it important that before you come out of that hospital room or before you walk out of your house, your makeup is on, your hair is done? I've had some clients who are like, I never go without my baseball cap. That's part of who I am as a person. So that's what we work on, is making sure that person either has on their hat or can put it on themselves, because that's important to that person's identity. Sometimes it's a watch. This isn't a watch, but I referred to it. That person's like, I wear a watch every day, and I know this limb doesn't work the same that it did before, but I really want to see that my watch is still on that limb. All of those things are part of a person's sexuality and the way that they express themselves. The other piece of that, I've kind of put this bottom picture to cue us, and that is that relational component. We want, again, to be able to connect to others, whether that is face to face or electronically. So much of our connection is happening electronically now. This could be of people connecting with people of the same gender or the opposite. And then these connections can be friendly or romantic. Sexuality doesn't always have to be that romantic, intimate side. It can also just be connecting with friends. So I just want to, again, broaden that definition and say, this is sexuality. It's so much bigger than what I think a lot of people recognize. So how has sexuality been affected after stroke? What's being reported is that people, stroke survivors and their caregivers and their partners, they're feeling really unprepared for the changes that they experience. So really unprepared in terms of managing with the changes in how their body is, maybe how their body looks, how they feel about their own body, or their concerns about how their partner feels about their body. There's also the fact that they're dealing with maybe fatigue and changes in desire to even be intimate. So they're unprepared maybe too for the changes that they have in their pre-stroke relationships and their ability to just engage in social participation and acts of intimacy. This one really bothers me, is that stroke survivors and their spouses or partners are feeling uncertain about even the importance of their concerns. And so their focus, whether it's, just in the beginning stages, but even long term, it's been on illness, the effects of the stroke, caregiving, medications, getting to appointments, medical appointments. And so when these ideas or thoughts or concerns about sexuality and intimacy come up, sometimes individuals aren't feeling validated, like, I don't know if I should bring up this topic, is it's not important enough when I'm dealing with these other effects of stroke. And I'm here to say, yeah, it's just as important as all of these other physical and emotional and language challenges that you experience. The third key thing that I wanted to just bring up tonight was that people are fearful. And what they're identifying of being afraid of is they're afraid to be intimate because what if I have another stroke? What if this causes a heart attack? And then another piece to that is the partners are often fearful of causing physical pain to the person who has had a stroke. So these are things that need to be addressed. When we look at the aphasia piece of stroke and sexuality, this is what's being reported, is that individuals who experience aphasia are involved in these fewer social relationships. So they have a fewer number of social relationships and the quality overall isn't as good. And so the stroke survivors, what they're saying is they're not getting out of the house as much. They're not initiating conversations with their friends, conversations with people in the community. They're staying home more. They're watching more TV. And when they are engaged in some of the social aspects, they're playing more a passive role, a listening role, instead of that communication side. And so it's not surprising to then see, because of that, individuals with aphasia are experiencing more loneliness and more depression. Some other highlighted concerns that are being documented is just, of course, that difficulty communicating needs and wants as related to intimacy, their ability to express feelings, initiate that intimacy, and have some of those conversations about intimacy that all partners need to have to be successful and satisfying. I also want to bring up just that partner side. The partners of stroke survivors and those with aphasia, they're also feeling left out. They're feeling a little bit forgotten and that their needs aren't being addressed. They feel this like sense of loss of not getting to connect with their partner as well anymore. So all of these last kind of comments just highlight how big of a need this is with the stroke population. But again, it's not being addressed. Why? So I want to talk about a few myths and reasons that it's not being addressed. And so these are kind of general statements, not just about the stroke population, but about the disability population in general. But there's this assumption that people with disabilities are asexual, meaning not sexual. But hopefully you guys heard me say, all humans are sexual. It's part of our identity, how we our appearances and how we communicate and how we interact. We value that intimacy and connection. So we got to get rid of that. Excuse me. Another myth is that people with disabilities are unable to have sex. And if we think about the disability community in general, there is a wide variety of what people are or are not able to do. When I think more specifically about the stroke population, what these individuals may experience are changes in desire. They can be affected by fatigue. They can be affected by levels of attention. They can be affected by some physical or sensory changes that can all affect intimacy. However, they are still maybe with some modifications, adaptations in the way intimacy is being performed, they can still be intimate. The third one that I put up here just to highlight is that a myth is that, oh, they have more important things to worry about than this. But again, I hope you've heard me say already that sexuality is so important to every individual's health and well-being and quality of life. So yeah, having a stroke is a big deal. Those are a lot of changes. It's scary. However, sexuality is a big deal too, and is still a valuable thing to address. From a health professional's perspective, I have to bring this up. Why are health professionals not bringing this up? One is time. On the acute side, on the inpatient side, we are pushed for time. And so, yeah, we're kind of going to this third bullet of, oh, it's not as important as me helping them do other things and making sure they're medically stable. But it is important, and we need to not overlook it. Another major thing that you see throughout all of our research is that people are not addressing it because they feel untrained and they feel uncomfortable with the topic. They feel like, gosh, anything related to being intimate is a taboo topic. Like that's meant to be private, or it's meant to not be discussed at all. Or you will see people hesitant to have these discussions if someone else's relationship is different than theirs, if their beliefs are different than theirs. And so those are kind of some of the barriers to addressing sexuality. Some of the other challenges that we are facing is that, it is kind of extra training, extra practice in communicating about sexuality. And also then, not all health professionals, some of you guys may have experienced this, not all health professionals are great about communicating well with people with aphasia. So we've kind of got two barriers there, learning how to communicate about sexuality and learning how to communicate effectively with individuals with aphasia. So I want this slide, I apologize, I know it's busy. This one is really geared to my health professionals who are in the group, because I wanted to provide you with a little bit of information to dig into about, okay, how do I start talking about sexuality? And so you will hear, when you look into talking about intimacy and sexuality, you'll hear of the implicit model, which was initially developed in the 70s. And then later it was expanded to be called the explicit model in 2006. And so these are frameworks, these are models for how to initiate and further discuss sexuality and intimacy. So I'm going to try and cover just little pieces of it. So hang in there with me for a minute. I love this first bullet. This first one is permission. And the reason I love it is because I misunderstood it when I was first learning about it. I thought as a health professional, that meant I need to ask permission of the client to see if I can bring up sexuality. And actually what this is the opposite. This is instead the health professional bringing up sexuality so that we are giving the client and the caregiver and the family and the partner and whoever, we're giving them permission to acknowledge their concerns, to acknowledge any issues or thoughts they have about their sexuality. So just by bringing that up and giving permission, we are validating any concerns that they might have at that time or later about sexuality. And we're letting them know, hey, I'm someone you can come talk to about this issue. The research is showing us too that patients are open to these conversations. Okay, and so what I'm really hoping for is that health professionals are more proactive in bringing up sexuality with every patient, and not just once, but addressing it on a routine basis over time. Okay, so that's the P. You guys, as health professionals, we can all do that. Give your patients permission to be sexual beings. Let them know it's okay to talk about this and it's important. The next piece, I'm confident you can also do this. And this is providing limited information. And so limited information is really still more general. It's broad. It's how has this stroke affected sexuality? And so sometimes for people who are really uncomfortable talking about this, a great way to start is to get a brochure, to get some type of, or have a great website that you like to refer patients to. This is some different ways that a stroke can affect your sexuality. And that's a great way to start. That is limited information, but giving these clients an opportunity to be more prepared and to start thinking about it so that they can adjust and get answers. A deeper level is this specific suggestions. And this is really where you get more working one-on-one between a client and or their partner and you trying to help problem solve through maybe some specific concerns. And so maybe it's thinking about a client saying, you know, I want to date and I'm trying to use this dating app on the phone, but I can't figure out how to use my phone and how to respond to these individuals. So it's a very specific problem that that person is asking you to help them problem solve through. Then the lowest level is the intensive therapy. And this is really for someone who has had significant training in sexuality and intimacy issues. These are for the more complex problems. It could be dealing with situations of sexual abuse, or it could be dealing just with more of the emotional side of things. And so that is more for your trained, particularly sexually trained professionals, where this could be, sometimes it is a social worker who has this specialty training. Sometimes it is your psychologists, your psychiatrists that have this special training too. So this isn't as many of your clinicians, your therapists, your OTs, your PTs, or your speech therapists. This is usually someone more specialized to just this one area. Okay. So what the other piece I just want to say before moving on from this aspect is that you as a health professional need to decide where your comfort and knowledge level lies within these implicit and explicit models. That's kind of a first step. But where I want to encourage you is that even if only a few members of your healthcare team, even without a lot of training in sexuality, if they address the permission side and the limited information side, and that's even like brochures and websites, if they're willing to do that, patients are still going to benefit. And sometimes that's the only level that people need. So I want to encourage you guys, at least be addressing those levels. Okay. Historically, here's one of the problems, is that health professionals are too general in their suggestions. You'll see on many websites, it's like, oh, well, if you have any questions about your sexuality, talk to your doctor. Or they'll say, if you have problems with your sexuality, make sure to be open with your communication with your partner. Make sure to practice good communication. And hey, these are all great solutions, great ideas, but they are still really wide. And so knowing that we potentially have a wide audience tonight, and not wanting to make people super uncomfortable, I still wanted to leave you with a few more specific suggestions. First one that's not really on this slide is to just say that, hey, for health professionals, it is best to provide information about sexuality in small chunks, not to give like a whole spiel and monologue at once. And so small doses that give individuals time to process the information that you're saying, but also time for them to make a decision of, do I want more information, or is that enough for me right now? So small doses. Okay, but here's some key things. Communication is important. That is, I heard it said that it is the frequency of relationships, communication is. So language is important to sexuality. However, where I counter that is to remember that language doesn't always have to be verbal. There's so many nonverbals that can also be used. And so this is, let's discover what are some of those other ways to communicate about intimacy. And so, you and your partner could say, oh, when you give that look, I know we're good to go. I know we're happy. I know we're sad. I know we're frustrated. Or maybe it's a physical touch, this cue that you kind of have decided on with your partner that just conveys meaning of, I love you, or I want to be more intimate with you. Those types of things you can identify with your partner. Also, even practicing short phrases that convey important meaning about intimacy. That can be really helpful in building intimacy in a relationship again. This next one I think is so pivotal. Finding shared interests. They could be old interests that really got put on the back burner because since the stroke, you and your partner have focused on the stroke itself, the appointments, the caregiving, and that's where all of your energy has gone to. So now let's address sexuality. And to do that, let's go do things that aren't necessarily related to stroke. What did we enjoy before? What can we do now together? Is it things like you enjoy cooking together, or you enjoy sitting and drinking wine and, looking at the horizon at night, watching each sunset? Is it listening to music that brings you guys joy? It's pulling those meaningful activities back into your life so that you find other ways to connect and enjoy each other that aren't related to caregiving and the stroke itself. I put support groups on there, and I don't know how you guys feel about support groups, but I wanted to broaden this definition of, it can be a formal support group or an official support group for stroke survivors, for caregivers of individuals with stroke, for aphasia groups. Those are all outstanding. And they're a good way, A, to get out of the house, B, to connect with other people, C, to share resources, share information, ask what you guys have learned from each other. But I also want to say support groups can be unofficial too. It can just be gathering with others, getting out and doing other things. That is support. That is social support, and it's meaningful also. The other point I want to put out there that I did on that bottom bullet is just, don't hesitate to value and prioritize your sexuality and things related to intimacy. And that That could be, as proactive as you've been with your healthcare, being proactive about seeking assistance in terms of sexuality. That could be from one of your rehab professionals, like an occupational therapist, a speech therapist, a physical therapist. Or it could be seeking more sexual counseling from a psychologist or someone with even a stronger background in those areas. But I want to encourage you to seek that help because it is important and it is valuable. So I hope this piece validated the worthiness of addressing sexuality for everybody, whether you're the health professional or just individuals. So now I did put some resources up here, and I'll leave them a little bit longer as we go into the Q&A. But you can look at, I like this book, The Ultimate Guide to Sex and Disability. I think it's a great resource, whether that's for health professionals or stroke survivors and family members and caregivers and friends and people who are just curious. Go for it. Then I also wanted to include some website options because I realized so many people love electronics and just accessing things through their phone now. And so the Spice Institute, I actually put on there more for the speech therapists in the audience because they have some free guides and resources to help beef up your knowledge and confidence and training as related to sexuality and intimacy. Then you have the Aphasia Network, and why I put this one up there is because they actually do a couples retreat. And so I just love this idea, and they encourage, development of this by other health professionals, but it's an opportunity for couples to get away, but also at the same time to have some sexual counseling, to have just opportunities to meet other people who have shared experiences and to get support from that, and time to just experience intimacy and social participation with your loved one. So that's a great thing from the Aphasia Network, as well as there are other resources there. And then the Aphasia Institute, I wanted to highlight also because they are Canadian based, but they just have some nice, easily accessible resources on their website that are good for communication tools as related to intimacy. So I hope you guys find those helpful. If you have more questions about intimacy, I have all my references too. So if you're someone who's like, I really want access to the references she used, please don't hesitate to email me at a later time. But now I want to obviously spend time and talk about any questions that you guys have. I was not able to monitor the chat. So Catherine, help me out, friend.
Thank you so much, Megan, for sharing us and giving us this common background and really opening this important conversation. We did get some good questions from people with aphasia and partners and caregivers. So we'll try to get to as many as we can. And if folks still have other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll try our best to get to them. So one person is wondering about meeting a partner and that aspect. So they ask, how can I meet a dateable man? And they're actually curious too. They don't want to have to use a dating app. So what suggestions do you have for them?
Actually, that's such a good question that I have been shocked by. I've been married. Oh, my husband's going to kill me. I think 16 years. He's better at the numbers. 16 years. And so, but I have a friend who was previously an OT student, and now she's just a family friend. She's just integrated into our family, and she's young, and she's going through these dating experiences, and they're all through an app. And I'm like, do people do like face-to-face dating anymore, or is it all through the app? And she said, most dating, and this is what my college students are telling me too, most of their dating are through all these online apps. And so that's just a different world. But so if you're wanting to avoid that, what are some suggestions I would have? Based on kind of some of the things I talked about in the presentation, I would say, well, it's important to get out of the house. It's hard to meet people if we're staying in the home. But then I would say you want to find people who have the same interests as you. And so I would encourage you to do the things that are interesting to you, the things that you value. Whether that's something like to participate in a cooking class, or I love to go to PetSmart because I love being around animals, or I enjoy the smell of the library and going to the library and being around books. But I would recommend choosing things that are activities and places that are meaningful to you compared to the club scene, the bar scene. The other recommendation I would have there is obviously the community isn't always the best at knowing how to communicate with people, particularly if they have aphasia. And so I would recommend being prepared for that. And so what does that look like? For one thing, I think it's about attitude and personality, and recognizing that you're going to have to be patient with the public. And so patient with them as they learn how to communicate well with you. And are there strategies that you can use if you have aphasia to communicate better, more easily with the public? Is it having that card or, something brief that helps explain what aphasia is or how to more easily communicate with you? Maybe it's something that says, hey, it takes me a minute to get my words out, but if you give me time, I'll get it out. And even a big suggestion in the literature, and what I found in my personal experiences too, is humor. Humor is so helpful in making people feel more comfortable when dealing with not knowing how to deal with disabilities or aphasia. So those would be just kind of a few specific suggestions for dating, knowing that I haven't dated in a really long time.
Thank you. That's great. Very helpful. Thank you. Here's another question. This person submitted this question that they've been seeing a man for 8 months with aphasia, and they have insight that their friends, this person's friends, are ignoring him. They see him differently. They say they don't see him as smart and neglect him. They write, I'm aware my partner needs to feel community with these old friends, but I want to explain my insight. Can you recommend what to do in this situation? They don't want to lead a life, they say, masking, but rather be authentic and full of real love.
Yeah, I appreciate your willingness and desire to address that, and recognition that communication is important. I would hope that what you're seeing from these lifelong friends is not something that they're doing intentionally, but maybe just from a lack of understanding of how the best way to communicate with their friend is, because it's different than before. And so kind of a few thoughts. My recommendation for how do you help the friends? I would say lead by example. Show them how you communicate with your partner. Show them, examples of, I tend to ask yes, no questions, or I tend to make sure I give him, 10 to 15 seconds to allow him time to think about what I said and form his own response. And you know your partner best. You know what communication strategies work best between you guys, but to demonstrate that and to even be explicit and share that with the friends too, if just even demonstrating isn't enough. I would also recommend talking to your partner. What are, you said a man, so what are his perceptions of his interactions with his peers? Because honestly, that's even more important than your perceptions. Like, what does he feel he's getting out of those relationships? Does he feel not valued? Is he getting the satisfaction that he desires from those encounters? And so maybe a way to say that is, you know, I'm not sure how they know how to communicate with you. What do you think? That might be a way to start that conversation. So get your partner's perspective too on what he thinks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Here's another question that we had submitted ahead of time.
Mm.
This person writes, with loss of sensation on my entire right side, getting a full erection is very difficult. I've been to a urologist, but his only solution was Viagra. That hasn't helped. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah. I'm glad you went to your urologist. I think that is a great step in trying to get help. And I think usually when these interventions are attempted, they happen in levels of, what's the word I'm looking for? Aggressiveness is not the right word. Less invasive, that's the word I'm thinking of. Less invasive to more invasive. So I think it's completely appropriate that they started with Viagra. One thing that would be along the same line is I might recommend, if you feel like Viagra doesn't work, try Cialis. So it's another medication, but it might work better for you. So that would be one recommendation I would make. Then some other things that you could try. I don't know how you feel, and this is kind of where those specific suggestions and getting to know people comes into play. But there are different toys, for lack of a better word, sexual toys and devices that can help stimulate some people, or it can be a turnoff to some people. So forgive me if I'm going to the turn off direction, but things like vibrators can be something that can help give you that extra stimulation that you're maybe not getting from just normal touch. There is even you have your over-the-counter vibrator, and those kind of have a maximum frequency, a maximum vibration rate. And so that many people who still experience erectile dysfunction and things along those lines, they can experience more full erections from the regular over-the-counter vibrator, but there is a medically prescribed one that goes at a higher frequency. That could be another option too. One of the brands for that is called Verticare. Another type of intimacy device there are the vacuum pumps, and there's like a manual technique and electronic technique that you could look into, but where it's basically think of a vacuum sucks things up, right? And so this is a vacuum device that draws blood into the penis to help get that harder, firmer erection. And then an elastic band is used that's put over the base of the penis to help hold the blood in there only while trying to be intimate. Obviously, that needs to come off as soon as that intimacy experience is completed so that we can restore normal blood flow. But that can help get a more full erection and sustain it for the length of the intercourse or intimate act. After that, you really get into things like injections or surgical procedures. We have individuals who choose to do implant devices, and there's actually different types of penile implants that can be used. There are the kind where it has like an inflatable device where when you are wanting to be intimate with your partner, that you inflate it and it creates the erection. And there is another type of penile implant where you basically have a semi-rigid erection at all times. And so kind of the great thing So the great thing about erectile dysfunction, that sounds weird. But the great thing about it is that doesn't just affect the stroke population, it affects the male population in general, which means there are more resources out there for people. And so, but again, there's those different levels to go through. And I would recommend continuing, okay, you tried the Viagra, try to jump to the Cialis before jumping to those more invasive options. But I hope that helps give you more detailed information.
Great. And you mentioned that it was great for them to have talked to the urologist. Is that the professional that you would recommend continuing these conversations with in this case?
I do think you have options. I think the urologist is a great option, and they usually are educated. Some of your, what we call PM and R doctors, your physical medicine and rehabilitation doctors, if that's the doctor that you follow up with, some of them have experience and they can make those recommendations for Cialis, or for, you don't need a prescription for the vacuum pump, but you do for that Ferticare, that high frequency vibrator. And then, depending on, you and your spouse, if it's a fertility issue, then maybe it's a fertility doctor that is coming into the equation also. So those are other resources that you could use.
Thank you. Here's another question that we got. They wrote, I'm a caregiver for my wife who has aphasia. The National Aphasia Association says aphasia does not affect intelligence, but since her stroke, her personality has definitely changed. How do you maintain an adult relationship when your partner has become more childlike?
Yeah. And so, that's tough. It's tough in this situation. And I don't know if I'll have an answer right now today, but I think that is where, this is definitely something you could bring up with your health professionals. And it's trying to find ways that you and your wife can connect. Intimacy, sexuality is different for everyone. For some people, that means sex, intercourse, but for others, it means meaningful conversation or just spending time together. So my first response as an OT is, what does it mean to you? What level of intimacy are you desiring? How are you wanting to connect with your wife? And just starting to find what are meaningful activities that you enjoy and she enjoys. Because if you guys are doing those enjoyable activities together, and taking time that is separate from the caregiving, that is separate from stroke-related service, that is going to start lending itself to feeling connected to your spouse again and feeling more intimate. And so, because I'm hearing, and forgive me if I'm incorrect, I'm hearing that you feel like her cognition may be still affected because she's acting at more that childlike level. It may be trying to discover new activities compared to some of the older things that you guys did before. But even maybe starting with looking through a photo album together. Those usually bring out, happy thoughts and happy experiences, but, and that might bring out some joy and some laughter from your wife. And so then you're connecting with her in that positive way compared to that kind of that illness, health mentality. You'd be surprised. I don't know why I always go back to cooking when I'm not really a chef, but it's because we have to do it every day, and maybe doing things where you might be surprised on the things that she could participate safely in cooking. And so you're doing things together and you're not doing everything yourself, but your wife is actually doing a part of it. And that can bring where it's maybe a decrease of burden for you, an increase of an enjoyment. And then if there's any way to find humor, add that in. Be willing and open to laughing at the ugly, at the awkward, at the uncomfortable, at the things that just come with being married for a long time. So be willing to laugh.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question, and it's somewhat similar.
Okay.
It's from a caregiver who
Mhm.
says, I'm too tired to think about intimacy with my
Mm.
role as a caregiver. And I could actually see someone with aphasia saying something similar, especially in those earlier stages, just too tired to think about it. So do you have any suggestions for that situation?
I'm really thankful for that piece of the question because I want to talk specifically to that caregiver in terms of the research shows us that the caregiver's mortality rate, it's higher if you're not taking care of yourself. And so, yeah, you're tired, you're fatigued, and it's hard to be intimate. It's hard to be joyful when you are running on empty. And so I would encourage you to value your health just as much as your significant other, whoever you're caring for, because you are going to be a better caregiver, a better partner when you're healthy too. And so it's like I want to just give you permission to take breaks. And I'm not saying, please, I'm not saying like leave your loved one, go away for a week, I'm going to the Bahamas. Even short breaks can help, even if it's like a 15-minute break, a 30-minute break. So really looking at what is your support system? Do you have other family members who can give you a little rest break? Do you have church members or other community group members that can give you a break? There is, are there ways to get your loved one involved in an activity or with other individuals that can allow you to step away? Is there, but again, kind of going back to what I've said several times tonight too, are there enjoyable things y'all can do together? Because that can be energy raising for you instead of energy depleting for you. But yeah, taking care of yourself is really important for you to be able to be happier and healthier yourself, and also to do an even better role in your caregiving role.
Well, thank you for that thoughtful response. And I'm sure we really could keep talking about this for hours. It feels like we've just scratched the surface. But again, I feel like this opens us up to the conversation, which clearly is such an important one. So I'll share my screen because Megan has generously offered that if folks have additional questions, they're welcome to email you, right?
Yes.
So if you have any questions, I had someone ask about, can I get a copy of the slides, or Megan mentioned the resource page, you can email Megan, and her email address is up here. It's megan.r.taylor@ttuhsc.edu. For more information about the National Aphasia Association, you can visit us at aphasia.org. We have a number of virtual events scheduled throughout the month, and these events are open to people with aphasia, their families, and clinicians. And you can find that information at aphasia.org/online-events. Next month is Aphasia Awareness Month. Our Ask the Expert will be Thursday, June 8th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be talking about intensive aphasia programs with the University of Michigan. We're also planning a series of Ask the Real Expert webinars for next month, led by people with aphasia. So stay tuned for more information. If you're interested in learning more about submitting a video for one of these webinars, you can email Denise, one of the affiliate coordinators, at denise@aphasia.org. And then finally, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions for Ask the Expert, you can email me at catherine@aphasia.org. So thank you all again for spending some time with us tonight. Thank you so much, Megan, for joining us. And we hope to see you next time. Have a great evening.
Thank you.